Welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And we're back with another edition of SEC After Dark, which means our good friend Stephen Lassan, senior editor over at Athlon Sports, is here to talk some SEC football. Stephen, how's it going, my friend?
Hey, Mike, it's going great. It's always good to be on some SEC After Dark. It's the middle of June, but we're talking college football, so life is good, right? No complaints here.
Yeah, but I do have one complaint for you, Stephen. I know you're not responsible, but your inbox is probably absolutely flooded with comments and complaints like the one I'm about to shoot your way. But I've been to my local Publix, I've been to my Kroger, and they don't have my Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine just yet. So again, for all the people out there, if they're in the same boat as I am, they're dying to get their hands on that Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine. Could you tell them real quick, how can they get their hands on theirs if they can't find it at the store?
It's funny you say that because I literally did the same road trip last week to try and find it, and I can't find it. I can't find it at the grocery store right now. So I guess the good thing is if you're looking to order and you haven't been able to find it yet, number one, the bookstore, probably Barnes and Noble, any other ones will probably have it out there. The second and third choices here, our online store at athlonsports.com. We have both SEC editions. I know they are selling very well, so we appreciate everybody's interest in the magazine this year. So athlonsports.com, or I think as one of your great listeners pointed out last week, Amazon. So that would be my best advice, is to go on the internet and try to find it, because otherwise I'm striking out too. So I can sympathize.
Right. So, hey, when this video is complete and I'm able to do it, Stephen, what I'll do is I'll put a link to the Athlon Sports online store. I'll pin it to this video, so anybody looking to get their hands on it can go directly to the source, get the cover they want, ship it directly to their door. But hey, on with business here, Stephen, and we got another great idea from you, SEC coordinator rankings. We're going to break down 1 through 16 on this episode. I'm sure we're not going to piss off anybody with these. How about it, Stephen?
I was about to say, I thought it was a good idea when I suggested, hey, why don't we rank the coordinator tandems in the SEC? I haven't seen anybody do that. Then I actually got to doing them, and I almost said, why? Why did I suggest this, Mike? So looking forward to it. I'm sure it won't be controversial at all, right?
Right. But before we get to that, real quick, one other thing. Just, I thought I'd let some people filter in and whatnot, and maybe if you want to throw us a donation, we'll go right to your coordinator ranks first above anyone others. But a couple of betting lines, game of the year lines, they're called, came out via Circa Sports. And I love Circa, not even a sponsor of the show or anything, but because they have such high limits, I think it's called, for actually betting on these games. I think it's something like $5,000. So you could go right now. I think you have to be in Las Vegas or at the casino itself in Las Vegas, but you can literally bet 5,000 and maybe even 10,000 per game. So that they really stand behind their betting odds here, and they've put out about 50 game of the year lines in the SEC. I'm not going to go over all of them, but there's about 10 here, Stephen, that really stood out to me that I don't necessarily agree with all of these. And that's why I really kind of wanted to pick your brain on these lines. How's that sound?
Mike, that sounds great. I will ask you beforehand just to make sure. Cousin Shane is not in Vegas betting on these lines currently, right?
Cousin Shane he's actually, he's in the comment section. He's a little bit under the weather, so he's still able to type though. So we do appreciate him. Cousin Anthony says, is Shane still at the Waffle House eating? That's a good one. But no, he is not in Vegas, at least not that I'm aware of. He's probably doing it under my business credit card. You know what?
Yeah, I was going to say, you locked down that SEC podcast credit card, right? I mean, you said he wasn't feeling good. Maybe he's been up all night at the sports book, the casino, right?
Right. Oh, I'd believe it. Trust me. He spends more time at Cherokee than anybody I know. But all right. Hey, speaking of Cousin Shane, how about we go? We got a couple Tennessee ones, and I swear I'm just going by date of the games. So that's what I'm doing here. Tennessee favored by 5, week 2 against NC State and Charlotte. I know I've kind of picked your brain about NC State before, but what's your thoughts on that? Tennessee being favored by 5 against NC State and Charlotte.
Honestly, I thought it would be closer to probably a touchdown. I think this is going to be a good early season matchup to sort of gauge both teams. We've got Nico in a kind of a big moment here for Tennessee. He already passed the first test against Iowa. NC State's defense was very good last year. They do have some turnover, so that will be something to watch early in the season. Like a Tennessee's offense, if it comes out firing on all cylinders against NC State, that would be a good sign. But also, I think it's a good test for Tennessee's defense. Grayson McCall, the quarterback for NC State, one of the top transfers in the nation. So in terms of like September early season games, this has a ton of intrigue for me, but I like the Vols a little bit closer to a touchdown right now.
Oh, okay, interesting. That's I mean, that's kind of where I'm leaning, but again, I'm trying not to get over the moon on the hype here. I've been seeing some hype for NC State, so really wanted to pick your brain on that one. And then one other Tennessee one 2 weeks later at Oklahoma. I don't think this is a big revelation or anything, but Oklahoma favored at home in Norman. First SEC game for both of these. First SEC game, of course, for the Sooners in this great conference. So, what's your thoughts on Oklahoma being favored by 2 against Tennessee?
Not surprising. This game very much, at least to me, feels like a toss up. When you look at Tennessee's schedule, I think it is pretty favorable this year. But there are like this road trip to Oklahoma early in the season. It could be tricky. You also look at the game against Arkansas come on October 5th as well. There's a couple tricky kind of road trips in there for Tennessee before they hit that Florida Alabama stretch in October. That's critical. But also, I think on the other side of things here for Oklahoma, if you start thinking about how can they hit that over in the win total, like if they can pick off Tennessee and they can pick off Auburn the next week, which are very doable, all of a sudden you start talking about, hey, maybe this team's got a chance to hit that 8 kind of 9 win range that you guys talked about in the Oklahoma team preview. So I think the biggest takeaway for me in that game is we're going to, and I hate to like repeat myself about the NC State thing, we're going to learn a lot about these two teams. And Oklahoma SEC opener, I think it makes sense they're favorite here.
And that's why there's such great value, Stephen, when these lines come out. Because if you're very confident, let's say in NC State, throw your money there. If you're confident in Tennessee, vice versa, throw it there. Because once we learn these things, then these lines could potentially drastically change. So the value is always when the line comes out, not the week of the game when they have a good feel for where these matchups will go. So I just threw that out there. And I know we've talked about this one, Stephen. How about I know you're not particularly high, thank goodness, on Central Florida, but Central Florida at Florida, Gators at home, according to Circa, favored by just 6 points. Thoughts on that? Is there value there in the Gators, or is there more value in Central Florida?
I like Florida here by maybe a point or two. I think this game is probably right around 7 or 8 points. Kind of how I would probably price it if I was making the sports book on this game. I think the biggest thing that worries me if I'm Florida, and I think this is also the case too for UCF, both of these defenses are a question mark, and you have UCF that has some serious firepower. KJ Jefferson, Gus Malzahn teamed up down there in Orlando. They've got one of the deepest running back groups in the country. But again, UCF's defense is not very good. And I think Florida will have no trouble moving the ball there. And it kind of feels like this is one of those games, like whoever wins this game probably wins it by a touchdown. Like I said, maybe 8 points. So I think there might be a little bit of value there on Florida. Maybe the play here is it's not up on the board, but take the over because there could be a lot of points scored in this one.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Come on, give me the Gators here. Now, how about this? This was a classic last year. Of course, not if you like defense, but a little surprised here. Ole Miss at LSU. LSU favored by a field goal. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised. It's going to be a night game. It's going to be late. There's a revenge factor and all. But I am so high on Ole Miss. Maybe I'm too high on them and not high enough on LSU. So maybe that's where it's got me. But I'm a little surprised to see LSU favored by 3, even though it is at home against Ole Miss. What's your thoughts on that matchup?
Mike, I almost think it's the intangibles here that give LSU the edge, like in the sports books' minds, the fact that it's a night game at home, the revenge factor for last season. So I think it's probably it's like the great location for LSU could really work out in their favor, getting Ole Miss at home. But I think just in terms of team strength, I actually think I would probably take Ole Miss here. Like as far as the value right now in the line, like if you're going to give me Ole Miss as a 3-point dog on the road to an LSU team it's got a lot of question marks, I think fair to say, coming into the season. And like you, I'm very high on Ole Miss as well. So I think if I'm getting 3 points in an Ole Miss as an underdog, I'm going to take it here.
And maybe this could be overstated. Maybe the value is not, and we should, it's a cliche, but it's true, Stephen. We give too much credit to quarterbacks. We give too much blame to quarterbacks. But the fact that we have a third-year starting quarterback in Jackson Dart, I think that really helps you on the road, particularly in the SEC, because he's seen it all at this point in time. That doesn't guarantee you anything, but I don't really get too worried about him and his performance in a very tough environment, if that makes sense.
I would agree with you in that. I mean, and especially I think Ole Miss kind of at this point, the 3-year progression here of being battle tested. They went, they've played at Alabama, they've played at Georgia. They will be battle tested, and LSU's a great environment. It's not taking anything away from them. I just think with the potential that this Ole Miss team has, and also they are very battle tested in these road environments, I don't think that certainly won't be intimidated going into this great venue on Saturday night.
Yeah, and how about this comment by Cousin Blanche? There's a lot of Ole Miss love in the comments. He says, just a lot of Ole Miss drunkards in here. That's a good early candidate for a comment of the night so far. How about this one? Again, I don't know that this is a big revelation. I think this has been pretty consistent. But Georgia at Texas, Stephen, a game many people believe could be the best in the entire SEC next season in terms of, possibly a top 3 showdown. I was about to say top 5, but it really could be even better than that. Georgia at Texas. Circa's got Georgia favored. No surprise, but only by 2 points. I think I've seen it around 5. I think I've seen it around 6. So 2 points is surprising. Any thoughts on Georgia at Texas?
If you would have asked me before these lines come out, what would you have said it? I probably would have said it a few points higher, maybe closer to like 4 or 5 or 6 here. Also, I think if there's a chance that these teams play 3 times, they could play once in the regular season, SEC championship, and meet again in the college football playoff. I mean, this could literally be the 2 best teams in the country. Ohio State may have something to say about that as well. But, I think Texas being at home, Georgia hasn't, going on the road to play Austin in SEC play for the first time. Certainly, I think that new kind of like we talked about with intangibles, the environment may be helping Texas on the line here. But overall, I think if you ask me to pick a side at this point of the offseason, I would still take Georgia to cover, not by much, that 2 points.
And you just made me think of something. I don't know that this has been asked. I've never heard this before, Stephen. So, obviously, going on the road and whipping Alabama like Texas did last year, that was a big wake-up call, I think, for the rest of the country. I think that was validation for Steve Sarkisian, and then obviously going on to the college football playoff. But what would impress you more, beating Alabama in the fashion they did in Tuscaloosa or beating Georgia at home this season? And with a caveat, let's say Georgia is as good as we imagine. Let's say they're number 1 undefeated. Which win would impress you more?
Man, that's a really good question. I would probably say the Georgia victory. If they beat Georgia, I would probably think that's a little bit more impressive. Certainly, it's hard to like pick against going to Tuscaloosa and beating a Nick Saban coach team.
Right.
But also this Georgia team is going to be picked number 1, going to be the overwhelming favorite in the preseason. And also I think too, like what level is the victory? Like to your point, if it's a convincing victory, move that to the top of the scoreboard for me for the Longhorns. So I'll go with the Georgia game.
And keep in mind, they haven't lost a regular season game in 3 seasons. So that's just insane. How about this one, Stephen? LSU at Texas A&M, according to Circa, that's a pick 'em. I've not seen it anywhere to where LSU was not favored. I don't believe. Maybe no. I think I have that wrong because I remember seeing somewhere that A&M was favored in every game outside of Texas, which I don't think that should necessarily be the case. But thoughts on LSU, A&M in College Station being a pick 'em?
I think this is priced kind of about where I would have it, like a point or two
Mm-hmm.
in favor of one team. I actually, if you asked me to probably pick a side, I would kind of hope that LSU would be favored here, so I could maybe bet Texas A&M and get a few free points during the offseason. So I'm a little disappointed that Circa's got it as a pick 'em. But I think in terms of just looking at the wins for both teams, this is really like a toss-up game. Like for A&M, the type of season they could have if they want to make that push to the college football playoff, they can pick off LSU at home. If you're LSU, you go on the road and win in College Station, and also setting up kind of that stretch of the season where you play Alabama. That would be kind of validation, I think, for what sort of this new LSU team is this year. New offensive coordinator, new quarterback, new defense. Go on the road in College Station and get a big victory would be huge for this team. So I think that's about right at a pick 'em.
Now, staying with LSU, Stephen, how about Bama at LSU? Circa's got LSU favored, but only by a point. So we're basically close to a pick 'em here. And given the home field advantage, obviously, to LSU, that's going to be the difference. Otherwise, you have to believe Alabama would be favored. Thoughts on LSU being favored to beat Alabama?
Mike, do you think that if Nick Saban was the coach, that Alabama would be favored here?
Of course, come
Yeah,
on, yeah.
yeah. It's kind of Captain Obvious here, right? But yeah, I think it's just sort of the book's kind of pricing in a little bit the uncertainty this year of Alabama, a little bit more unknown, a little bit more of a wild card than we're used to seeing out of Alabama, but still, just in terms of like where this game is, it has been such a crucial part of the SEC West title picture. And now Alabama to go on the road and be a 1 point underdog. I mean, certainly motivation for Jalen Milroe and Kalen DeBoer, but also like we talked about with LSU, there's chances here. You're getting Alabama at your place. Obviously, you have to go on the road to A&M. You get Ole Miss at home as well. So I'm not surprised, I guess. I think I'm kind of pricing in the unknown of Alabama this year and as to why they're probably an underdog here.
And this is something also I was talking with cousin Shane about on a episode that's not been aired yet. So hey, we're breaking ground here, Stephen. But for Bama, four critical games I want to highlight real quick: Georgia, Tennessee, LSU, and Auburn. Now, Nick Saban, Alabama, they've essentially owned everybody. During his tenure, he's the greatest coach of all time, in my opinion, at least in college football. Which program, again, Georgia, Tennessee, LSU, or Auburn, do you think it's most important that they can beat a Kalen DeBoer coached Alabama this season so that they can turn around the narrative and maybe they can kind of spin it and start to believe it wasn't Alabama that owns us. It was that Nick Saban that ain't coming back. You see what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
getting over this psychological hump. Which program do you think is most critical that they do it this year?
Yeah, I hate to kind of give you bad answers. Like I could almost argue for any of those,
Right.
but as you're asking me that, I almost went to like Auburn. Because you could really kind of, this is kind of the situation where I think looking at Auburn's roster and you see how some of the pieces could fit into place for next year, you have a chance to sort of, shake up the rivalry. They almost won last year. They almost beat Georgia. Auburn's trying to get to where Georgia and Alabama are. And if you could beat Alabama this year, get revenge for what happened last season and, kind of start to climb back up and maybe certainly doesn't hurt in recruiting to beat Alabama. I would probably go Auburn there, Mike. But to be honest with you, I could make a compelling case for any of the four that you asked me about there.
Right, and I think you could kind of start to spin it to where maybe you could start to try. You're not going to own Alabama, I don't think, unless Kalen DeBoer is a complete disaster. But
Yeah.
you could kind of start it down that trajectory by winning this year for basically all those teams.
Yeah, would also be huge for Hugh Freeze to sort of score one of those after how last season transpired and sort of kind of say, hey, this ship is going in the right direction, especially if you go into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama.
Right. All right. How about this one, Stephen? Georgia at Ole Miss. Two what I think will be the two best teams possibly in the SEC. Georgia favored by 7 in Oxford. Mighty Lane Kiffin. Went out and got the guys so he could compete in these ball games. Yeah, where would you lean early? Georgia at Ole Miss. Georgia favored by a touchdown.
As high as I am on Ole Miss this year, and as optimistic as I am about defensive improvement, I still think you have to take Georgia here, -7. I know it's a lot on the road in the SEC, but it's one of those situations where Georgia is the king,
Mm-hmm.
and when you're trying to come at the king, as they often said on a certain TV show, you best not miss. And so I love the fact that Ole Miss is getting this game in Oxford, but it's also, I think we've seen kind of time and time in these games that sort of the favorite, the guy that has the crown, kind of can make a statement in these situations. So I'll take Georgia, but I think it's a lot closer than it was last season.
Okay. How about, oh, man, this is a good one. The comments may explode here, Stephen. Oklahoma at Missouri. Missouri, according to Circa, favored by 2 points. What a battle this is going to be. Where would you lean there? Oklahoma at Missouri. Missouri favored by 2.
Which side would inflame the comments more, Mike? let's see if we can get everybody going tonight, right? I like Missouri here. I just think that, first of all, I'm buying sort of Oklahoma being a little bit underrated coming into the season. I think all the focus is going to be on Texas, and because they made the playoff last year, I think we're sort of overlooking Oklahoma coming into the SEC. But also, I think Missouri, this team is built to win now. And this season, with everything lined up, it's probably going to be Luther Burden's last year. Missouri getting Oklahoma at home after they haven't played since Missouri left the Big 12. Good spot, I think, for Missouri to win this one. So I'll take the Tigers -2. I think that's some pretty good value there.
Okay, he's at Athlon Stevens Sooners. Don't come at me. How about LSU at Florida, Stephen? They've got LSU favored by 6 points in the Swamp. I think that's a good spot for the Gators. You're getting LSU after Ole Miss, Arkansas, A&M, Alabama back to back to back. Again, I know Florida's stretch here is pretty brutal too, but I kind of lean Florida in the points at home.
I would too. I think I was about to say this could be a trap game for LSU, considering they're coming off the Alabama game. It's on the road the next week, and then you look at Florida's schedule: Georgia, Texas, and then LSU. So there's no break, I guess, is the best way to put it in the SEC. But I think with the way that we know LSU comes into the season with question marks on defense. We know Florida can score. You're getting them at home. I think with all the questions that LSU has coming into this year, -6. If you can grab that for Florida, that's kind of where I like it right now.
Mm-hmm. How about Bama at Oklahoma, Stephen? I've seen Oklahoma favored in this one. Now we've got the Tide favored by 2 on the road, November 23rd at Oklahoma, according to Circa Sports. Where would you lean there?
I like Alabama here. Not by much. I think I'd probably price this game a little bit closer to 5, maybe 6 points. Certainly, I think the good news for Oklahoma, this game being later in the season, gives them a lot of time to sort of settle some of these pieces on the offensive line, defensively too. So I think obviously by the November 23rd, we're going to know a lot about both of these teams. We'll know more about Alabama and Kalen DeBoer, and Oklahoma will be well settled into the SEC by that point. But I think -2. I think I'd take Alabama here.
Mm-hmm. And then last, but certainly not least, Stephen, this is a game, I could talk about this every day till it gets here. Texas at Texas A&M. Texas favored by 5 points in College State. Come on. One of the best rivalries in all sports. Favored the road team. I get it. But where would you lean there? Texas at A&M. Texas favored by 5.
I would probably grab A&M here. I think there's there's kind of this theme that or I guess a phrase I like to say in college football. There's like the moment game.
Mm-hmm.
You get a chance where the stars align. You're getting, if you're A&M, you're getting Texas at your place after this long delay. Texas won the last time these two teams have faced. A&M is kind of looking for that statement victory. The stars kind of aligned for A&M in this spot. I'm not saying they win, but I think if I'm looking at just opportunities to wager this offseason, my A&M getting Texas at home and Texas A&M being the underdogs a pretty prime spot for me.
Yeah, shout out cousin Rick here. Aggies at Kyle, beat Notre Dame, beat Mizzou, spank LSU, bring on Texas. I mean, that's the attitude you got to have during the offseason. I love it, cousin Rick. Thank you for the donation. But all right, hey, that's all the games I wanted to highlight. There are so many more that we could talk about, and we will before the season gets here. But on to the show topic once again, Stephen. I appreciate you for coming up with this show topic on today's show. But we're going to rank the SEC coordinator duos. So this was a challenge. Stephen and I were talking about it before we went live here. He's not showing me his list. I've not shown him mine, but we're talking 32 different coaches trying to piece these things all together. How much debate went on internally for you, Stephen?
Pretty much the last 2 days. Yeah. Like I said at the beginning, I don't know why I suggested this to you, because I knew I'm going to agonize for every second trying to figure these out. I will tell you kind of my thinking on the method of the madness here. I went in and sort of loosely ranked every offensive and defensive coordinator 1 to 16. And then I looked kind of, hey, Alabama's coordinators are X and X, and the total went down through all of the teams in the SEC. And then I sort of maneuvered around based upon subjectivity. So I kind of used hard data, what they've done throughout their career, and also a little bit of subjectivity. I think there are some tiers that are really close together. Like if you think a little bit higher of one coordinator, they could almost go from 10 to maybe 5 in these rankings. So I think there's a lot of close clusters in the coordinators ranks.
Well, before we make some friends, Stephen, let's make some enemies. Let's start at the bottom. Who do you have as the number 16 coordinator pairing in the SEC, and then I'll give mine.
Mike, I've got South Carolina at number
Ooh.
16 here. It was a close call. I had 3 teams in consideration for 14 through 16. They were all pretty close. Here's kind of my reasoning. First thing, I have Dow Loggins rated as the lowest offensive coordinator in the SEC. I've got Clayton White closer to 10 or 11. I think, and you start looking at, Vanderbilt improved by making Clark Lee the defensive coordinator. I also think they hired a pretty good coordinator in Tim Beck. It was kind of easy almost to default to Vanderbilt, but in the end, I think the Loggins hire still remains a question mark. The production last year, very similar to Marcus Satterfield's production as offensive coordinator. I do like the improvement that we saw late last season by Clayton White. That was their best finish in SEC-only games under his watch, 27.5 points. So a lot of room to improve, but the Loggins hire to me is weighing this down in South Carolina's 16 ranking.
Yeah, real quick, Stephen, shout out cousin Jared. Appreciate you. He just gave us a $2 donation. He's a big LSU guy, so I appreciate you. But yeah, I think, again, I don't want to skip ahead too much here, Stephen, but I think you nailed it, because I didn't put South Carolina 16th. I put them 15th. So we're very close. Dow Loggins. Again, I don't know how fair it is to judge them off 1 year, a lot of injuries. But one thing that was critical in my review, just when I'm kind of splitting hairs here, Stephen, I go by scoring efficiency, how they did in 22, how they did in 23. And if you don't understand scoring efficiency, I love it because it's just so simple. It's how many snaps you had, how many points you scored. So the more, if you score more points and you're taking less snaps, your efficiency goes way up. If you're scoring less and you're having more snaps, your efficiency goes down. So it's very simple metric. And South Carolina was actually, I know Marcus Satterfield, not that he was a fan favorite of anyone on this show, but South Carolina, believe it or not, Stephen, they were the 24th most efficient scoring offense in the country last season under Marcus Satterfield. We jumped down to 71 last year, so a huge step back for South Carolina. So I agree with everything you said. Dow Loggins, again, not that effective last year. That's why I've got him all the way down there. But number 16 for me, and it's, again, this ain't gonna make any friends, I don't think. But hey, this is what I think, and it's I'm going with Florida, Stephen, and we're counting Billy Napier because he is the play caller, and Austin Armstrong, who our defense was just complete garbage last year. I think of all the units that were bad last year that kept their coordinator, I think he's the worst. Now, he's like 30 years old, so maybe he's got, the best days are ahead of him, what have you. But we essentially hired a coordinator to oversee our coordinator, and that's just awful. So Austin Armstrong's really weighing you down. I don't think Billy Napier's awful because I certainly think the offense showed signs of life last year in Gainesville, particularly late in the season. But it's evident to anybody that watches Florida that Billy Napier does not handle game days in the SEC as effectively as he should. So I'm kind of docking him here because I don't think. I don't know. I mean, it depends on what Florida fans you talk to. They're not happy with Billy Napier. I mean, they had what was it, the number 4 quarterback or number 4 overall prospect in the draft a couple years ago. Just wildly inconsistent, and I put a lot of that on Napier. So, again, Napier, I'm not calling him horrible. I'm not firing him. I've been singing the praises of Florida all off season, but give me Florida for the worst coordinator duo in the SEC.
I'm a little higher on Florida, but I will also say they fit very much into that, 10 through 16 range that I found to be pretty close. And I think I don't know whether I should give my ranking away for Florida just yet, but I will say on Austin Armstrong, I think the numbers are alarming. I mean, last season, SEC games, 34 points a game allowed. They were last in the SEC at 7.4 yards per play. That's worse than Vanderbilt. I mean, just things you don't expect out of a Florida defense. So I had Austin Armstrong rated as the lowest returning defensive coordinator in the SEC at 15, which certainly weighed into my ranking of Florida. I do think Billy Napier is a pretty good play caller, but I think, Mike, to your point, I think he's got too much on his plate on the game days. That way you maybe prevent some of the special teams blunders that we've seen over the last couple of years. Someone to take that off his plate might serve the entire program better.
Right, and well said. I mean, it's like we're looking at the same notes here. I also have Austin Armstrong, worst defensive coordinator in the SEC, short of one guy that I really have no information on because he's never called a play in college football, nonetheless, the SEC. So that is what it is. But who do you have number 15, Steven?
I've got Mississippi State. I think that, kind of to what we were just getting at there, Coleman Hutzler, I think a total unknown as defensive coordinator. He's my number 16 defensive coordinator in our rankings here. The good news is I think he has been hired by some good coaches. Nick Saban had him on staff. Also, they have Matt Barnes, who was a defensive coordinator at Ohio State for one season, and Memphis. So I think you have some experience on that staff. The argument to have Mississippi State higher is I think Jeff Lebby's a pretty brilliant play caller. And I know that he had some errors at Oklahoma last year in situations, but UCF averaged over 40 points a game when he was offensive coordinator, over 30 points a game back-to-back years at Ole Miss, and then last season first in the Big 12 in scoring. So the track record is there. He's really weighed down by the defensive coordinator here in Coleman Hutzler.
Yeah, hey, again, great minds think alike, Steve, because that's where I went with 14 and just everything you said. I mean, Hutzler was the guy I was just referencing. We just have no data on him as a play caller. So how can I rightly, throw him at the top of the list? Not saying he's awful. He could be brilliant for all I know. And everybody deserves an opportunity to prove it wrong. But for now, he's just an incomplete. And I know Oklahoma fans, they will strongly disagree with us when it comes to Jeff Lebby, but I don't get it because again, I've got the numbers right here. Oklahoma was the number 9 scoring efficiency in the country last year, and again, that's points scored per snap. So they were highly effective with Jeff Lebby last season. If Mississippi State can have a top 10 scoring efficiency in the country, Jeff Lebby may be National Coach of the Year. I mean that, and it's not just Oklahoma. He's got a strong track record at Central Florida, at Ole Miss, even at Baylor. So he comes from a long line of successful offenses. So I think Jeff Lebby will be of all the coordinator hires in the SEC. This is going to be the biggest addition, I think, in all the SEC this offseason.
I think the thing that I worry like 2 or 3 years down the road for Mississippi State is, does Jeff Lebby just have too much on his plate, much like Billy Napier? But also, I think if you're trying to get this program going, it's the right thing to do to handle the play calling duties. Because, Mike, to your point, we may do this list again next offseason. And if Mississippi State's around 8 or so, it's because that the offense really took off. We could look at this and go, they've got 5 new starters in the offensive line, new quarterback, and they were still, pretty effective in the SEC. So I think we'll learn a lot about Jeff Lebby's ability to make something out of nothing right now. But also I think the Coleman Hutzler thing, the sort of a year zero situation on the defense, only 2 returning starters, a ton of turnover, I think expectations are pretty low. So I think you're just looking for small signs of progress if you're the Mississippi State defense this year.
Right. And shout out Cousin Ryan. Go Dogs. I will not tolerate any Bobo slander. I got none of that. He loves the show. Appreciate you, Cousin Ryan. But no, Bobo, nowhere close to being the worst in my mind. We'll get to Georgia here in a bit. They're pretty high on my list. So who do you have number 14, Stephen?
Mike, I've got Vanderbilt at
Ooh.
14. This was, I could have had Vanderbilt a couple spots higher. I think optimistically, Clark Lee, probably one of the top 8 defensive coordinators now in the SEC. His defenses at Notre Dame were 12th, 13th, and 14th in scoring defense. So top 15 every year. I think it's smart for him in such a critical season to take over the play calling duties. Also, I really like the Tim Beck hire as offensive coordinator. New Mexico State's offense got better over the last 2 years. They definitely skewed towards the run, which I think is be a good fit with some of the personnel that Vanderbilt has this season. And he was a successful head coach at the lower levels, Pittsburgh State. I think he's kind of worked his way up, kind of cut his teeth. He's ready for this chance. I think Vanderbilt's in a much better situation coordinator-wise than they were last season. Tim Beck is a big upgrade. Clark Lee's a big upgrade. I've got them 14th, but honestly, I considered them as high as number 11 here.
Oh, well, you ain't going to catch any Vanderbilt slander from me, Stephen, because I got them even higher than that, but we'll get there when we get there. Now, this is going to be controversial. I hate it because I've been singing the praises. I like this higher, but number 13 for me, Stephen, is Arkansas with Bobby Petrino. Again, you hear the name Bobby Petrino and you say, oh my goodness, he just done this, he's done that, he's the elite quarterback whisperer and all that. But, he's kind of far removed from a lot of that. And that's not to say, I've said many times, I thought he did a good job for A&M, very underrated job for A&M. So this is not necessarily a reflection of A&M. I put Bobby Petrino as the 8th best offensive coordinator in the SEC. That's about, and you could convince me to put him maybe 6, something like that. So, he's hovering in that range. But Travis Williams, who I thought he did a good job last year, but again, I'm looking at the scoring efficiencies here, Stephen. They were number 95 in the country in defensive scoring efficiency. That was actually down from the Barry Odoms last year at 85. So, I don't think it's fair to necessarily judge Travis Williams because I thought the first half of last season, I was wildly impressed with how far the defense came. And then the second half, complete collapse. I've said that many times. If we could get that first half defense, if we can get Bobby Petrino in his prime, this is going to be the sneakiest good coordinator duo in the SEC. But I'm not ready to just hand it to him because we've actually got some good coordinator duos here.
I considered Arkansas as high as number 6. I did not finish with them at that high, but I think to your point, I think kind of the jury's still a little bit out on Travis Williams. I think you like the improvement from the season or the things you saw early in the year. They gave up at least 36 points in 3 out of their last 6 games. The only opponent that they didn't give up a lot to was FIU, who scored 20 in late in the season. So definitely, I think late season slide for them is a concern. I do like the fact they gave up fewer big plays than they did the year before. Petrino's one of those ones. I have him as a top 5 to 6 offensive coordinator, but you're also in that range where everything 4 through 8, 9 is really close. So on the margins, I've got Arkansas a little bit higher, but I also understand the skepticism too.
So who is your where are we at on your list? Number 13?
Yeah, I've got Florida at 13, so
Okay.
a little bit higher than you, Mike. I go back to Billy Napier here for a second as a play caller. Really successful at Louisiana. They were consistently one of the better scoring offenses. Top three in the Sun Belt, 6 yards of play. It is the Sun Belt, so I don't want to overrate that too much. The SEC is a much different level of ball, but also I think the development of Graham Mertz. Just the fact that Graham Mertz went from being maybe the 13th, 14th quarterback in the SEC in the preseason to contending for all SEC honors this year is a pretty big deal. Austin Armstrong is a concern of mine. I have him rated as the 15th best coordinator. If this was Ron Roberts calling the defense this year, I would probably have him a lot closer to being the top 10 defensive coordinator. So I like Napier. Would like to see a little bit more explosiveness on offense, but pretty productive. Just Austin Armstrong, a big question mark.
Mm-hmm. So number 12 for me, and Stephen, I may have missed the mark on this one, but I'm not as familiar with the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator certainly, but I put Oklahoma 12th. It was with Seth Luttrell at offensive coordinator, Zach Alley at defensive coordinator. Now, what I have read about Jacksonville State and the job Zach Alley did, apparently he did a tremendous job. I believe they were top 35 in the country in scoring defense. So pairing him up with Brent Venables, I'm very high on his future. He's not done it at this level, although he has been at Clemson when they were very successful. But maybe I'm missing the mark a little bit on Seth Luttrell. I'm not saying he's a bad coach by any means, but I'm largely unfamiliar with his work as a play caller. I know he was on staff last season, but what's your thoughts on putting Oklahoma number 12?
I'm questioning my rankings now because I'm pretty high in Oklahoma. So I guess we're going to have a pretty big disagreement here. I think on the surface, I sort of baked in a Brent Venables like discount to the defense because it's his defense, and Zach Alley's kind of a branch off of that. So
Right.
You're getting kind of a seamless transition there, and also a massive upgrade over Ted Roof. And one of the funniest coaching comments in our preseason magazine was, Ted Roof, he got hired at UCF. He lost his fastball. And he lost his fastball 10 years ago. I don't know what happened last season. But I actually really like Seth Luttrell. I can go a little bit more into his numbers later on, but his offenses at North Texas were always really productive. And also, most importantly, it's not just an offense that chucks the ball around the field. I think he understands the physicality and rushing attack that you need to win in the SEC. So I'm a little bit higher in Oklahoma.
Okay, so who's your number 12 then?
Going to hide under the table. I've got Missouri at 12.
No.
So I think let's start with the unknown. And I think what drags this ranking down is Corey Batoon. Just an unknown
Right.
with taking over the defensive coordinator spot from Blake Baker. When he was the defensive coordinator at Hawaii, the numbers weren't great. It is tough to put together a pretty good defense at Hawaii, considering the style of play and the job. When he was at South Alabama, 3rd, 4th, and 5th in scoring defense, but how much of that was Kane Womack? How much of that was Corey Batoon? That's the big question. On the other side of the ball, I think Kirby Moore, Eli Drinkwitz nailed this hire last offseason. You just look at the productivity, 24.8 points a game in 2022, up to 33 last season. So Kirby Moore working with Brady Cook. I love what they did last season. Very high on Kirby Moore as a coordinator, but the uncertainty of Corey Batoon kind of weighs this ranking down for me.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And now you got me questioning my ranking for Bazoo, but we'll get to that when we get to it. But I echo a lot of the same sentiments there. All right, how about number 11 for me? And again, if these are a little tricky to do. I'm going to go Texas A&M, number 11, with Colin Klein and Jay Bateman. Now, if you were to tell me, or if I were to know that Mike Elko's calling the defense for A&M, I'm just unclear with that. If Mike Elko's calling the defense, I'm probably moving Texas A&M up to top 4, legitimately. That would be a huge audition, but I don't know. I think they've been unclear. Otherwise, excuse me if I'm mistaken, but I'm giving it to Jay Bateman, and I'm not saying he's awful or anything, but that's just how elite Elko is. As for Colin Klein, his reputation is outstanding. I think he was we're going from 2014 offense to 2024 offense with Colin Klein. So very high on Colin Klein, but I'm a little bit lower on Jay Bateman, if that makes sense.
I think I share your kind of thought on Mike Elko. Like if we knew, I guess in a way it is the Mike Elko defense, and Jay Bateman would probably be calling it. But also, I think if Mike Elko was the primary play caller, I think they would be a top five group for me. So I'm a little bit higher on Texas A&M. There is one team that I may have drastically underrated compared to you that I have at number 11 that I'm currently second guessing my opinion of. But the A&M, this is in that range where all these teams are so clustered close together. Like if you like one coordinator a little bit higher than the other, you can kind of move them up a couple spots. So I can't really disagree with your rankings there, Mike.
So who's your number 11 then?
I got Auburn at 11.
Oh,
So I think the good news is for Auburn is two proven play callers in the SEC, Hugh Freeze and DJ Durkin. I think what concerns me is like a little bit of a mixed bag of success for DJ Durkin against teams with a winning record last year. A&M gave up 34 points a game. So in matchups that it really mattered, they really struggled. They were number 7 in defensive success rate last season. So although they gave up a lot of yards and points at times, the advanced metrics did kind of like them a little bit better. So I think even going back to Ole Miss, there was some improvement from year 1 to year 2 when he was the coordinator. And with Hugh Freeze, the offenses have been solid. I think the question for me is, can he do it? Was good at Ole Miss that one season. Liberty was pretty solid. Can he put together a kind of a high-powered offense in the SEC in the modern era? So I worry, much like Napier, too much on his plate, trying to be the head coach, offensive coordinator, but he is solid. So I may have Auburn a little bit too low at 11.
I think you do, Stephen. And I thought I was the Auburn hater, but clearly it's Mr. Stephen Lassan.
Yeah.
So we'll get to them in a minute. But here's I'll go. Now we're into the top 10. I'm going Vanderbilt for the reasons you said. And again, I got a ton of respect for Clark Lee. Had he had his hands on the defense the last couple of years, I'm sure they would have been better. But he is a couple of years removed from it. So we'll see if there's any negative effect. Again, I don't necessarily think there will be, but that is, I think, a concern. Tim Beck, everything you said down there at New Mexico State, he did a heck of a job. I believe, I could be mistaken, but I was reading his bio, Stephen. I think he won a national championship at Pittsburgh State or something like that. So, I mean, this guy, he's got a lengthy record, even though most people probably have no clue who this guy is, but he's coming in with his quarterback. He's coming in with his former head coach down there at New Mexico State. So they're turning the keys over to Tim Beck. I'm fascinated. And man, I got my fingers crossed that Vanderbilt can be a competent, team as opposed to, the laughingstock they have been for the better part of 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons, whatever you want to call it. So give me Vanderbilt, top 10 coordinator. And I think this is a huge step in the right direction for the first time of the Clark Lee era.
Yeah, it really feels like, Vanderbilt had that weird setup where David Ray was like the play caller for like a couple months in Clark Lee's first year, and then he ended up not calling plays, and then he just like disappeared. So
Right.
that was a weird setup, but it really feels like Vanderbilt's got a really stable and a really high quality situation at both coordinator spots. Clark Lee's very proven. Tim Beck, they're sort of just importing the New Mexico State operation to Nashville, which worked very well at out in Las Cruces last season. So I think a Vanderbilt staff significantly better this year than it was last year. And that's a good thing going into this, what I think is a pretty critical year for Clark Lee.
So who is your number 10? We're in Steven's top 10 now.
I got Arkansas. I
Ooh.
was surprised that you were so low on him, so I'm going to pump up the hogs here. I love the hire of Bobby Petrino. I mean, Texas A&M was number 5 in the SEC in scoring offense last season. I would like to see a little bit more big playability. Only 8 plays of 40-plus yards last season. We'll just blame Jimbo Fisher for that. I think Petrino sort of having the keys to the entire offense. He can do whatever he wants to do without Fisher overlooking him is a good thing. I would like to see a little bit more out of Travis Williams. Obviously, they gave up 5.68 yards per play. That was down from 6.5. Trending in the right direction, cut down on the big plays. He was pretty good at UCF too. They cut their point total by a touchdown in his season as the play caller there from 2020 to 2021. So some good signs. And Petrino's obviously, I think, one of the best in the SEC. So give me Arkansas at 10.
And there's no way to really quantify this, Stephen, but it goes without saying that Petrino left under bad circumstances. We don't have to rehash all that. Everybody knows what happened. But, just given the fact that, and he has talked about this, but the fact that this is his opportunity for probably the biggest mistake of his entire life to kind of right some wrongs. And again, we all like to pretend that this coach loves our team and that coach loves our team and this guy wouldn't give up anything to get hired by Alabama or Georgia or what have you. There's very few of these guys that truly are with every fiber of their being in it. That's the truth of it. I think Bobby Petrino is probably all in because he's trying to make amends. He's trying to right some wrongs. He's trying to save Sam Pittman's job. And if he can do that and he can turn around Arkansas offense and they have a great year, then you know what his legacy is? His legacy is he was a huge piece in turning around Arkansas and the coach we all love, Sam Pittman, letting it, what if they win 8-9 games this year and they get that momentum they had a couple years ago? That's not completely unrealistic. So that would be his legacy in that state more than anything else. I truly do believe if he has a 2-3 year run here where they just get better and better on offense. So again, that's maybe a little hokey here, but I think that's what you can hope. That's the best case scenario if you're an Arkansas fan.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And also, I would think Petrino, we've seen throughout his career, there is a bit of an expiration date that's often fast. So I think it's a perfect scenario where he can come in, he has the reins, the total control of the offense, and maybe there's not that burnout factor that he kind of wears on people. He's coming in to improve it. He's got something to prove. And so I think that works well with what Arkansas needs right now. So that's kind of why I think there's a little bit of motivation and why I've got Arkansas probably a little bit higher than you do in these tandems.
Right. It turns out Cousin Shane is 14 minutes behind on the feed. And Cousin Jared said not even Shane gets notifications, but I can assure each and every one of you, Shane does not even know what a notification on YouTube is. So there's that. All right, how about by number 9? And I'm interested to see where you go with this, Stephen. If you agree, disagree, if this is the same, ballpark as you. But I'm going LSU, and I'm giving Joe Sloan the offensive coordinator duties, play calling, essentially. I know Cortez Hankton is going to be co-OC, passing game coordinator, what have you. But I believe it'll be Joe Sloan who called the plays in the bowl game, and pairing him with Blake Baker, of course, new defensive coordinator. So number 9 may seem a little low, but it's more about uncertainty with Joe Sloan. And this is not to say he's awful or anything like that. I know he coached with Skip Holtz over at Louisiana Tech, and they have, everywhere Skip Holtz has been, they have offense. So this is not a big question to me, but it's a slight unknown, if that makes sense. Team with Blake Baker, who I don't want to trash him like some of these Mizzou people do. I think he is very, very good, but I would also say I think it's fair to call him the most overpaid coordinator in college, because I think he's the richest. I think he's like the richest coordinator in college football, and he is. I wouldn't even put him in the top 10 personally of all coordinators in the country. What's your thoughts on that?
I've got LSU just a few spots higher, so I think we're right in the same ballpark here. I think what I was looking at while you were going through LSU, I just noticed that between LSU and Auburn in my rankings, the coordinators ranking all the OCs and DCs, you're talking about there's several of these that are tied and separated by 1 or 2 points. So we're, like you said, we're getting into this range where there's not a ton of separation. I think to dive into LSU a little bit, I think the biggest question for me is the offensive side of the ball with Joe Sloan. Everybody behind the scenes that's worked with Joe Sloan at Louisiana Tech, LSU really thinks highly of him. There is no pressure at all. I mean, you're taking over an offense that was number 1 in the country and scoring an averaged over 8 yards a play, and you had the Heisman Trophy winner. So I just think, Sloan, I think it's fair to rank them this low because of Joe Sloan. On the flip side, I like the Blake Baker hire. I think it's one of the best hires of the offseason, and they need somebody of like Blake Baker's caliber to come in and improve this defense right away. So that his hire kind of boosted my ranking of LSU.
Okay, so who do you have at number 9, Stephen?
I've got Texas A&M. And I was just kind of thinking here, like, why do I have A&M ahead of Auburn and these in this cluster? I think really highly of Colin Klein. I think his ability to adapt, to mold to personnel. You look at Kansas State, they lost Deuce Vaughn, kind of a dynamic running back, ended up being just fine offensively this season. Also, like the fact that they were good in situationals, good on third downs, good in the red zone. They led the Big 12 in touchdown percentage in the red zone. So, despite losing Deuce Vaughn, they were even more productive on the stat sheet than they were last season. So I have Colin Klein rated, closer to the top 5 of my coordinators. Being a coordinator on the rise kind of weighed into my ranking a little bit here. Jay Bateman is kind of a fascinating case study. When he was at Army, one of the best defensive coordinators productivity wise in college football, wasn't so great at North Carolina. North Carolina's had bad defense now for a couple years. They had to, they had to dust off Gene Chizik off the shelf and bring him in to be defensive coordinator, and he was a disaster. So maybe it's just Mac Brown, but it's Mike Elko's defense is what I'm going to hope for by putting Texas A&M at 9.
And please pardon my ignorance here, Stephen, but when he was at Army, Jay Bateman, did they run the triple option or anything like that?
Yeah, they did. So they weren't on the field a ton.
Right.
They're very good at attacking, sort of, and it's sort of a cliche, but they were very good at being aggressive when he was up at Army.
Well, again, that's why scoring efficiency, that's another metric of why it's so valuable to look at, because some coach, coordinators, defenses, offenses, what have you, let's say a defense gives up 30 points per game, but they're on the field 90 snaps a game. That's actually a pretty solid defense, whereas you're giving up 25 points per game, but you're only on the field for 50 snaps, you're not doing near as job as the other guy. So again, that is critical to factor in all these things, what you're allowing up, given points. But let me ask you, because you just made me think of something. Of all the guys we've hit on so far, Stephen, that have not been head coaches of these coordinators, could you make the case that Colin Klein, of all the guys we've mentioned, if he does well at A&M this year, and who knows, if he stays much longer because his stock is so hot, do you think of all the coordinators we've mentioned, Colin Klein is in the best position to potentially be a head coach in the near future?
I do. Yeah, I think he's going to be in a perfect spot here. I mean, Mike Elko being a defensive coach, this is his side of the ball. Obviously, the head coach will have some input on how to mold it. But I think having that leeway, what we've seen at Kansas State, the fact that he was a successful quarterback not too long ago, his stock is very much already on the rise. Pair that with what could be a pretty solid debut season for Mike Elko. Absolutely. He would be very high on my coaches on the rise list for this season. If you want to throw out maybe Blake Baker as kind of the other guy who could be a head coach pretty soon so far out of this group, and maybe Zach Alley would kind of be my other 2 names to consider.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, hey, again, Auburn fans, Stephen has you lower than me. I got you number 8 here. Hugh Freeze, DJ Durkin. Not a huge fan of DJ Durkin, but his numbers, they're not awful when I started to dig into the scoring efficiency. Where he was at, let's see, Auburn last year, or excuse me, where the hell was DJ Durkin?
Texas A&M.
There you go. Texas A&M. I don't even know what I'm talking about here. But again, yeah, I think I looked up the wrong team. So to hell with DJ Durkin. He's awful. But Hugh Freeze is good. He is is he a good man? No. Do I believe a word he says? No. But can he coach quarterbacks? Can he score points? He can. He will. And he'll take credit for every good thing you do down there. He'll blame someone else for everything bad he does. But he does more good than bad. So give me number 8, Hugh Freeze, DJ Durkin.
Mike, I think I'm too low on Auburn by a couple spots, so I'm going to go ahead and just take my medicine right now and just admit that I was wrong. But I think in the big picture, this is a really solid, proven SEC coordinator duo. You have change, but you also have two guys who have called plays in this conference and have put together some pretty productive groups. And also not just here, but Hugh Freeze at Liberty as well. So kind of the same thing we talked about with Napier. I do worry Hugh Freeze is trying to take on too much, but at the same time, I think when you see the production last year, the question marks about the staff continuity, the staff meshing together, there can't be any question marks about it this year because this is Hugh Freeze offense and he's calling the plays.
Right. All right. So who do you have, number 8, Stephen?
Mike, I've got Kentucky.
Ooh.
I think I was going to make the case that Brad White might be the most underrated coordinator in the SEC, or maybe even for a good chunk of college football.
Right.
I do wonder if Mark Stoops, being a defensive guy, sort of contributes to maybe Brad White not getting enough credit. But if you look from 2019 to 2022, Kentucky ranked in the top 5 in the SEC every year in scoring defense. They were a little bit down last year in SEC play, so they have some room to improve. That's the good news. I've got Brad White rated as a top 5 DC. The other side is Bush Hamdan, and I think this is a big question mark for Kentucky. You look at his offense last year at Boise State, first in the Mountain West in conference play, over 200 plus yards a game on the ground. So I think the style philosophically will mesh really well with what Kentucky is doing. His offense at Washington, they weren't good. This was Chris Peterson's end of his tenure. Year 1 to year 2, they got worse. A lot of unknown for me. Boise State's been kind of a pretty unique place to coach, and whether that translates elsewhere, I think remains to be seen. So a lot of questions on one side, but for me, this rating is really propped up by Brad White being really underrated, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. And I'll get to Kentucky in a moment here, Stephen. But number 7, this is where I have Missouri with Kirby Moore and Corey Batoon. And everything you said about Batoon, I agree. Don't know much about him. He's with a head coach that was a defensive guy, so it's hard to give credit for something like that because we don't even know where to assign the credit. But where I love Kirby Moore. And he took over Mizzou, obviously, last year. They were 83rd in the country scoring efficiency in 2022. They were number 22 in 2023. So a massive jump forward. I think he was probably the best hire of the SEC coordinator cycle last year. So going into year 2, I got a ton of faith in Kirby Moore. He's another one. I purposely asked you that, Clyde, before we got before I got to Kirby Moore, because I think Kirby Moore is another candidate that could soon be a head coach in college football. Give me Kirby Moore, but I'd put him a little bit higher if I knew more about Corey Batoon and felt confident about his defenses. Not to say he's been bad, but I just don't know what to do with him, really.
I think maybe a point in Missouri's favor ought to be what happened last year, in that since the start of his tenure, Eli Drinkowitz has had a chance to hire a couple coordinators, and he's nailed them. Kirby Moore, I think we both think pretty highly of. I've got him, close to the top. I think he's certainly in top 10 somewhere in coordinators after just one season in the SEC. Right. And, Blake Baker being, hired as defensive coordinator. So they really nailed their recent coordinator hires. So I think you have to give Drink a little bit of kind of benefit of the doubt by hiring Corey Batoon, even if you don't know whether it was Womack or Batoon as sort of the brain trust behind the really good South Alabama defense.
Now, he did hire Ted Roof at Appalachian.
Yeah,
that's Appalachian. I don't know whether resources or whatever. But all right, who's your number 7, Stephen?
I've got LSU, so just a few spots higher than you. Kind of all the same things that you said about LSU kind of resonated. Joe Sloan under a tremendous amount of pressure to replace Mike Denbrock. On the bright side, kind of like we mentioned, I think a lot of people are very high on him behind the scenes. They also have a lot to work with. One of the best offensive lines in the country, and Garrett Nussmeier. Blake Baker, when he was the defensive coordinator, he's kind of bounced around a little bit. Louisiana Tech's defenses were solid. Miami's defense regressed in 2020 after being pretty solid in 2019. Hard to read into 2020 too much. The stats are kind of skewing a lot of different ways, but they paid him to be a big-time defensive coordinator. He's got to deliver this year. I like him as one of the top, 6 or so coordinators in the SEC. So I've got LSU at number 7.
When you say 6 or 7 coordinators, are you saying overall or just defense?
Defense, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. I was
So
about to
I had
jump
you
on you
worried
till
there.
you said that. All right, for number 6, I actually have Kentucky that you hit on. I agree everything you said about Brad White. Not that his defenses have not been stellar but again, I think you have to factor in the talent that you're working with, and that's not to slight Kentucky, but they are a developmental program, and I know they've been sending guys to the NFL. They get all SEC type players, but they really got to hammer and develop those guys. They're not getting many 5 stars, many elite 4-star prospects to come to Kentucky. They're kind of molding guys into that. But and to your point, Bush Hamden, there's some certainly cause for I don't know, cause for concern is the right word, but I would add that the scoring efficiency went up at Boise. His only season there, they were 46 in the country. They took a jump up to 35. So not a huge jump by any means, but they didn't get worse. So he is a big question mark for me. To put Kentucky as the 6th best coordinator duo in the SEC, that should give you an indication of how highly I think of Brad White. I would probably have him as the 2nd best defensive coordinator in the SEC. And maybe that tells you something about there's not a lot of elite defensive guys in the SEC right now, but I'm not trying to slight him. I think he's probably a top 10 defensive coordinator in the entire country.
I think in fairness to Bush Hamden, it is very likely that he has improved a lot as a coach over the last couple of years. Washington at the end of Chris Peterson's tenure was kind of tailing off a little bit, and he did a really nice job last year navigating some quarterback turnover. They also had some receiver injuries at Boise State. So I think fair to say that he's probably improved a lot since then. And his experience, I think also his experience as a actual quarterback could help a lot with the development of Brock Vandagriff. So I totally get the hire from Stoops. It just makes total sense, like philosophically, and from what we saw at Boise State last year.
Right. Anything's better than Rich Scangarello.
Yes,
let me just tell you
that is 100% right about that.
So who's your number 6, Stephen?
I got Oklahoma at number 6.
Wow. So way different than me.
So I think the things that I like about Oklahoma, we'll start with Zach Alley. I think he's a coach on the rise. And like I mentioned, it's a branch off the Brent Venables tree. You're basically getting Brent Venables in a younger form, going to be taking over the defensive play calling duties. I thought it was interesting after he was hired. Brent Venables said, there's a familiarity and comfort based on our background together at Clemson. So you're talking the same language. Like I said, he's basically the mentor-mentee situation here. So I think Zach Alley, Brent Venables, I think top-notch defensive pairing there for Oklahoma. Offensively, Seth Littrell, I think it's going to be pretty seamless to go from Lebby to Littrell. You'll see some differences, I'm sure. But when he was the head coach at North Texas, one of the better rushing teams at the end of his tenure, also consistently putting together pretty solid offenses as a whole throughout his tenure. He's been an OC at Arizona, North Carolina, Indiana. And to go back to Zach Alley for a second, Mike, I think it's kind of interesting that Jacksonville State moved up from FCS to FBS, and their defense led Conference USA in scoring, fewest points a game allowed, and fewest yards per play. He did a really nice job under some really challenging circumstances, playing all new teams that have been recruiting at the FBS level for a couple of years. So I think Oklahoma's got a good one in Zach Alley, and I think Seth Littrell's really solid as the offensive coordinator. That sort of balance kind of put him this high.
Yeah, and if memory serves, Stephen, maybe it was 2 years ago, Jacksonville State nearly knocked off South Carolina. And that would have been during his tenure as well. So, again, I don't know how much credit he gets for that single performance.
It was last season, Mike, November 4th. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, there you go. So I just remember that. I was like, my God. But again, hey, credit to him. All right. So, hey, we're in the top 5, Stephen. I've got the Georgia Bulldogs here. Mike Bobo, Glenn Schumann. And, these guys are tough for me to grade. I think Mike Bobo is a lot better than people give him credit for. I mean, heck, he's responsible for some of the most explosive offenses in the entire country in SEC history. Last year, the offense was not the problem. And not that they had many problems, but, it was injuries. It was not being able to stop the run against Bama is what did them in. And I'm just not sure how to rank Glenn Schumann. I mean, he could be outstanding, but I'm going to lean towards giving Kirby Smart the credit for the deep. And now that shouldn't be a slight to Glenn Schumann, but if I'm not mistaken, Steve, we've never seen Glenn Schumann not paired with Kirby Smart. This going back to their Alabama days. So until you step out on your own, it's tough for me to evaluate you. I'm not saying you're bad, but it's just hard for me to really place a value on Glenn Schumann outside of I know he's one of the best recruiters in the country.
That was kind of the same question with Dan Lanning when he took over at Oregon. Like, how much of that was Kirby Smart? How much of that was
Right.
Dan Lanning? Turns out Dan Lanning's pretty dang good too. So I think that's probably the hope if you're an AD who wants to interview Glenn Schumann in the future for a job. I consider Georgia at 1, so I'll kind of hold my cards a little bit on how high I am on Georgia. But I think Mike Bobo. I think the offensive coordinators in the SEC, it seems to be a little bit deeper than the defensive coordinators. I think
Right.
Bobo's pretty solid up there near the top of the list, and you're getting into some pretty good territory. Like you said, the offense was explosive last year. And then the question for me in evaluating Georgia was the Schumann Kirby Smart question. That's the hard factor to figure out in this one.
So we're in your top 5, Stephen. Who do you have number 5?
I got Tennessee. I got, I think for kind of an interesting battle in my mind here, because I think on one side, you've got an elite play caller in Josh Heupel. Last season, only 24 points a game in SEC play. That was down from 43 the year before. But you look outside of that, I mean, UCF was first, and second. And Tennessee, of course, led the nation in scoring offense in 2022. So no doubt about it. I have zero doubt about Josh Heupel's ability to be an elite offensive coordinator. I do think Tim Banks, the defense has gotten better, but this is kind of an imbalance here. You've got Josh Heupel, a top 5 play caller in the SEC. You've got a lot of question marks with Tim Banks. They gave up 33.6 points per game in SEC contest in 2021. It's down to about 27.6 last year. They were kind of good at takeaways, which is good in kind of a team that Tennessee has to play to its offense. But I'd like to see more out of Tim Banks before I rank this pairing any higher.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I think that's fair. But I got him higher. So we'll get to that in just a second. Number 4 for me, Stephen. I'm going Bama. Kalen DeBoer, Kane Womack. I obviously Kalen DeBoer, his reputation's outstanding. The last 2 years at Washington, Stephen, the Washington was number 7 in scoring efficiency on offense, number 9 in scoring efficiency 2 years ago. So just a remarkable job. Probably not giving Kalen DeBoer his credit, but he did have a quarterback that went in top 10. So maybe we got to see a little bit more before we name him, the best coordinator, offensive coordinator in the SEC. I still got a couple guys ahead of him. And then Kane Womack. This is nothing against him, but again, I'm not quite sure what to make of him. Defensive scoring efficiency at South Alabama took a big nosedive last year. They went from 21 in the country 2 years ago to 47. Now, I don't follow South Alabama. I don't know if there's injuries. I don't know if the schedule. But, again, that doesn't strike me as an elite defensive mind. I know he comes with a tremendous reputation. So I could be dead wrong about Kane Womack. But he's the one that's kind of holding me back here.
Deep cut here on the Sun Belt. South Alabama was one of those teams that they should have been better than their record was last season. So kind of a mystery as to why maybe they did not win the Sun Belt. Troy was pretty good too. Anyways, back to the SEC. I actually have Alabama at 4 too.
Okay.
We agree. I think everything you said about Kalen DeBoer is spot on. Averaged over 36 points a game, back-to-back seasons. Did have some help from Ryan Grubb. How much that was Womack, how much that was Ryan Grubb. I think they're both pretty good on their own. Also, Indiana averaged 6 yards a play when Kalen DeBoer was the play caller, and DeBoer's offenses at Fresno State were very good too. So that's now 3 different, FBS stops in recent years that he has been very productive as a head coach, play caller type. And on Kane Womack, Indiana's defense 2019, 2020 got better under his watch. They were pretty solid, I think, overall in the whole tenure at South Alabama. How does he adapt to the personnel? I think a lot of unknown here. How much was Womack? How much was Batoon? So that's what put Alabama at number 4 for me.
And pardon my ignorance here, but did Ryan Grubb, didn't he get hired by an NFL team?
Yes, Seattle Seahawks.
Right. So again, I'm certainly not. I don't want to give him all the credit or anything, but that should give you an indication of what an NFL franchise thinks about him. So that's just an interesting note that that may go under the radar if Alabama's awful on offense next year. We're going to be saying, man, Ryan Grubb was something. But again, I don't think that'll happen. Just something to keep to monitor. Number 3 for me, Stephen. I don't think you were far off. I was just giving you a hard time. I'm going Tennessee, and for the same reasons. I mean, Josh Heupel, offensive wizard. But again, I can't cite all these scoring efficiencies and then just completely ignore his. Because 2 years ago, Stephen, Tennessee, number 2 in the entire country, offensive scoring efficiency, took a big jump back last year, 41 in the country. So again, not awful, but huge step back. Was that more about the quarterback? I think that's a concern you can have. But as for Tim Banks, Stephen, 27th in the country in defensive scoring efficiency 2 years ago, 29th last year. So, consistent. I don't think he's nearly, some Tennessee fans have it out for him. I don't get it. I think he's a quality defensive coordinator. Is he elite of elite? No, but you may never get that with getting paired. Again, it goes back to how many snaps you're facing. How many snaps a defensive coordinator under Josh Heupel is going to face year in, year out. It's always going to be among the highest in the country. So for the position he's put in, I think Tim Banks is. Let's see where I ranked him. I put him roughly 7th best defensive coordinator in the SEC. I think that's a fair grade for him.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on what I always think about Tim Banks and Tennessee is that I think he gets a lot of probably flack online about Tennessee's defense, and some of that is they don't necessarily have to play elite shutdown defense in order to have the kind of team they need to be able to win the SEC. If they're getting off the field on third downs, getting stops in the red zone, getting takeaways, those timely situational stops is really what this team needs. And the stats have been better. Like you said, they've been consistent. They haven't been awful. But I do think this is a pretty critical year, and they have a lot of questions still in the secondary, and we'll see where that goes because I do think Tennessee's offense is going to jump back to much like the level that we saw in 2022.
Mm-hmm. All right. So who is your number 3, Stephen?
I considered this team and Alabama and 2 others for the number 1 spot. So I had 4 teams in consideration. It's Ole Miss. The gap between 1 and 4 in my mind is very, very small. Obviously, Lane Kiffin, an outstanding play caller, one of the best in the country. They've averaged over 30 points a game in 4 consecutive seasons. Even going back to Florida Atlantic, first in Conference USA 2 times over 3 years. At Alabama, first, second, and fourth in scoring offense. You could just go on and on. He's one of the best, and it's not just that he's good at developing quarterbacks. They run the ball. And the ground game, the physicality you need to win at the line of scrimmage in the SEC. And Pete Golding, a massive upgrade, I think, on defense. Certainly, it's a pressure pack season with all the transfers coming in, but he's been solid at UTSA. Pretty solid at Alabama. That may not go over well in some spots of the internet, but it does feel like Ole Miss has one of the better sort of balanced tandems in the SEC.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. That's why I got the Rebels number 2 coordinator pairing in the SEC. Pete Golding, he's underrated, as crazy as that sounds in my mind. But again, he's not Kirby Smart. That's his flaw. Yeah. There's not many Kirby Smarts out there, obviously. So I agree with everything you said. Kiffin's nailed it. And the thing I love about Kiffin, Stephen, he is one of the very few that adapts so well to his personnel. He doesn't make the personnel adapt to him. And I think these guys that get labeled as geniuses and all that, that's their biggest issue. They try to force a square peg into a round hole. Not Kiffin. 1 year he's got Derrick Henry. They run the hell out of the ball. 1 year he's got Amari Cooper. He's throwing it at him 150 times. He adapts to his personnel. He gets the best player on his team touches, and that sounds simple, but half these guys on this list don't do it. So I don't get it, but that's a credit to Lane Kiffin. For my money, he's the best offensive play caller in college football, at least in the SEC. There could be others outside the SEC that I don't pay attention to, but it's either him or Sark. They're kind of 1A, 1B for me. And Pete Golding, who I have is probably the fourth or fifth best defensive coordinator in the SEC.
Mike, do you think on the question of Lane Kiffin and his adaptability that we might see Ole Miss throw the ball more this year? As weird as that sounds, like we're just sitting here praising his ability to not forget about the run game and chuck it 50 times a game. Prescorn, Wells, Harris, Watkins. I mean, right? I mean, I think they have to some extent, especially with Judkins off to Ohio State.
Yeah, you hit on the critical point right there. Judkins is gone now. The only issue with that is, and it's not an issue, but bleeding the clock, things of that nature. Can you do it? Certainly, you can do it with a passing attack. But I'm kind of fascinated to see, because the last couple of years, Kiffin has leaned so heavily on that ground game, and they have added 4, 5 transfer running backs, whatever the heck it is. So they got bodies back there, but they don't have a Judkins back there. So yeah, that's going to be fascinating to see. And I wouldn't even. Here's how I see that playing out, Stephen. I think, again, let me throw up our schedule real quick. I mean, everybody's seen it by now, but the first month, I think they run the ball like crazy. And then maybe the 2 games I really am highlighting here, LSU and Georgia. Those are the games I could see them going past crazy.
Yeah.
It maybe essentially what I'm trying to say is, like, you don't hold things back, but maybe different style of game plans to try to trick the opponent for your marquee game. Something like that I could see.
But I also think you used kind of a phrase there that I think is interesting in thinking that maybe you hold something back. Jackson Dart had 119 carries last season. Thinking long term here, I don't know that I want Jackson Dart toting the ball 119 times this season. If you really have, and Ole Miss should, aspirations of going to the playoff, I want him healthy in late November, December for that stretch run. I mean, maybe that just seems cliche, or maybe that's just basic to say, but I think as much as they're going to miss Judkins, I think between Bentley and some of the transfers they brought in, even without Krosky Merritt, they should be, I think, fine at running back productivity wise.
Right. So who's your number 2, Stephen?
Georgia. I think kind of everything you said about Georgia, just a really solid pairing. I think pretty highly of Mike Bobo. I think sometimes gets a little bit of unfair criticism in some circles of the internet, but always solid. And Glenn Schumann too. The question for me in weighing Georgia at 1 was really is how much of it is Kirby Smart, how much is Glenn Schumann? But Schumann has always been a kind of considered a rising star, even back to his time at Alabama. So I think can't go wrong with Georgia at 1 or 2 at this point.
Right. So, hey, we have the same number 1, of course, Texas, with Sarkisian and Pete. Give me a hand here, Stephen. How the heck do I say this guy's name?
Kwiatkowski.
There you go. I'm not even going to try it. But he may be the best. He probably is the best defensive coordinator in the SEC. You can easily make the argument Sarkisian's the best offensive play caller in the SEC. So this, I don't know about you, Stephen, but this was kind of like a no-brainer for me. I think it's Texas by a Texas mile, or whatever they say. I think this was an easy one for me.
Yeah, I debated Georgia, Ole Miss, and Alabama, but after I started sifting through the numbers, I think it was pretty clear. You could make an argument that Sark is number 1 offensive coordinator. You can make an argument for Kwiatkowski, number 1 defensive coordinator. So it was pretty easy after that point. I mean, you can go through the numbers. I mean, Sark second and third in scoring offense so far, averaged over 47 points a game both seasons as the Alabama offensive coordinator. So I just love the way that he and Kiffin are great at this, the way that they kind of schedule plays, staying on schedule, the timing, the motion, everything that they do, well scouted. I also love the explosiveness that we saw from Texas last season with the opportunity to be better, and the improvement that Texas has made defensively over the last couple years. I think speaks very well to Kwiatkowski's ability to put together a top flight defense.
Right. So I can't wait to see the battle in the comments, Steven. There's
Yep.
so many people are going to rip us to shreds. I can't wait for it. But hey, buddy, I appreciate you. As always, I appreciate everyone for showing up. Before we cut this one, Steven, can you tell the fine folks once again, how do they follow you and how they find your work?
Absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at Athlon Stephen L. CFB on Facebook and Instagram, all CFB365 on YouTube. And be sure to check out athlonsports.com if you want to get a preseason magazine.
Absolutely. Well, all right, Steven. Again, I appreciate you. Another successful SEC After Dark. We thank each and every one of you for checking us out. If you made it this far, please like, subscribe, share the video. That's all we ask. We don't ask for much. So that's going to do it for this episode of the show. We'll catch you on the next one.